Hark now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Scripts command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through wearable seats to boxes flow. Hoist the sail.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Partnership. I'm super excited to have Sharon Markowitz with me today, who has led partner and product marketing at companies like Atlassian, Zoom, and Indiegogo, and also Intuit as well. And so I've been, hoping that we have this conversation for a long time. It's been a long time coming. Travel schedules didn't quite line up. But partner marketing is such an important topic, and I feel like it's underappreciated by a lot of partnership leaders who just don't understand it enough. And so I'm incredibly excited for this conversation today. So I wanted to start with a question for you, Sharon, which is, where do you draw the line between product and partner marketing? Like, you have roles at both. So I'm really excited, to understand, how do you switch from one to the other, or where is the difference?
Of course. Well, again, thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited about the conversation and to be a part of the community today. And so I think when you think about product versus partnership marketing, the reality is it's quite fluid. Product marketing is traditionally understanding your customer, figuring out what are those right customer insights that you can influence the product roadmap with, building the right messaging for go-to-market campaigns, enabling your sales teams, but it's all about the company's solutions. Then when you think about partnership marketing, that is really more so about adding value to the core offerings. And I think it's so important, kind of what you brought up as part of the introduction, is that customers don't see the silos or the organizational structure. And I think that's so important when you do partnership marketing. It is actually embedded as part of the existing go-to-market motions that your product marketing team is having. An example I can share would be when I was at Atlassian. Atlassian is all about improving team productivity, and their culture very much embeds that, or embodies that, I should say. And as a result, even though product and partnership marketing teams were separate, we still went ahead together to solve that customer problem for kind of making that magic happen, if you will, for the 1+1 being greater than 3, for that, better together story.
Got it. I think it's so interesting. Like, you're absolutely right that customers don't really care about the distinction. And so you as an organization should also be fluid enough to accommodate that, and not just have this is partner marketing, this is product marketing. Like, it should feel like it's part of the same narrative that you're sharing with your customers. I'm curious then, how do you measure the impact of these activities? So let's say you're in charge of product or partner marketing, and you're new at a company. When you joined Zoom, for example, you were in charge of the app marketplace, product marketing for that, which is kind of like a hybrid between product and partner marketing. How do you measure the activities there? Like, how do you know if you're doing a good job when you're new at this role?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, metrics are so important. I think if you do not measure the different efforts that you have, you're just guessing, and then you also can't manage it. When it comes down to partnerships and how do you measure it, it is going to vary on the type of the partner, maybe the actual effort, and also the maturity of the ecosystem. Like, there's a lot of factors that go into it. So, when I was leading, the app marketplace for Zoom, a lot was, figuring out how to build scalable go-to-market programs. And so one of those was a bundle of apps, a bundle of third-party apps that was embedded in our core solution. And the focus in terms of KPI was around MRR, which means monthly recurring revenue. And it was focused on both acquisition and retention. So acquisition is probably a more digestible, term to understand. Oh, right. So if someone goes ahead and makes a new customer makes a purchase, that's acquisition. Retention,
Mhm.
though, as it relates to partnership marketing, is also important because it's known that typically when a customer starts to use an app as part of your core product, they're stickier, they're more likely to stay.
Mhm.
And so those were some of the metrics that were used for that particular effort at that time. Another example would be, when I worked at Indiegogo, which is a crowdfunding platform, and in partnership with a consulting partner, uh, they basically wanted to focus on marketing qualified leads. And the reason was they were basically looking to get small businesses, which were hardware startups, to start to use their product, which was more in the product development area. And they cared more about just getting them into the program. And the reason that the small businesses would be interested in it was they raised the funding. However, they weren't sure how to actually scale. How do we scale product development? How do we actually distribute it? So there were points in which they would stall. So in this particular case, understanding why the partner is coming to the table with you at the company, and then what is that right KPI metric that makes most sense to measure allows for their success and then the company's success long term, right? Making sure small businesses, after they actually raise funds, can actually ship a product out. So at the end of the day, metrics matter. They may vary, and that's okay. I think one of the interesting realities, for
Mhm.
better or worse, is that a lot of companies still do not have metrics in place for partnerships.
Yeah, it's very similar to what I'm seeing as well. But I think a lot of companies also, especially the large ones, like the companies you work with, I feel like some of them sometimes also don't have like unified metrics across the business. I think it is the best kind of companies which can say like it's MRR or it is MQLs or it is
Hmm.
conversions from free to paid. Like at HubSpot,
Hmm.
for example, like famously had like free to paid conversions as like the number one
Yeah.
metric for the whole company. And I think not every company is always aware of like what that would be because they're so big, right? They have so many different moving parts that like different teams might have different metrics at chasing after. But it
Yeah.
sounds
And I
like
wouldn't say, or go ahead. I'm sorry.
it sounds like the main message is that you have to align it with your business values again. Like what is it that the business really cares about? Like Indiegogo
Very
cared
much
about something
so.
different than Zoom. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Whatever you're doing is what is the overall company vision? What is the company's KPIs, if you will, that matter most in terms of layering up partnerships to that to make sure that, you're just doing the right work and ultimately doing what's right for the customer.
Yeah. I'm curious, like when you said Zoom primarily cared about MRR, was that like Zoom's own AMRR, or was that also like related to the partners as well? Because I guess when you track partner metrics, it's interesting to think about whether you track impact that partner has, like as in, what's driving the partner's
Yeah.
business versus your own as well.
Well, I think that the example I gave is an example of one of the many go-to-market programs that I worked on, which
Yeah.
implies that not all metrics are MRR. And so I think it's as a company, really the focus is on growth. Therefore, if you want to layer up to that, how do you do that? And I would say that, it's not always simple to just get that spreadsheet or that dashboard in Tableau of, making sure you can see those numbers, maybe easier for acquisition. But when it comes to retention, you have to do a little bit more work, make sure, yeah, you might have to look back a little bit more and do some additional analysis to make sure that the numbers stack up, if that helps.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. So one of the things, so there were so many things I wanted to ask you just because like you
Yeah,
worked in so
yeah.
many interesting
Of
companies.
course, of
But I've been
course.
trying to think about like what that experience must have been like when you come into a company like a Zoom and you're in charge of like overlooking like 2,000 partners. And at Hopin, I built up an app marketplace from scratch from like, 0 to 50, and it felt already like kind of overwhelming. But how do
Yeah.
you prioritize if you have that scale of like partner apps, like 2,000 partner apps? Like how do you know which partners to work with on campaigns and which ones not? Do you have like a tiered system or how do you filter?
Yeah, I think that when you're dealing with an app marketplace, I do think ultimately it's really, figuring out what is that right balance. It is an open ecosystem, which means anyone can go ahead and build an app as long as it gets approved by the team at the company to be published.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how things also happen to be like, wow, 2000 apps, where, I'm not sure it happened if you, had a different approach in terms of how did you get to those 50 apps, right?
Yeah.
But with that said, when I had joined, I would say I probably got an email a day from a developer wanting to promote their app, and they were doing the right thing as a founder for their business, figuring out I built the app. Like, how can I actually leverage the resources now with Zoom to go to market? And sometimes it was just to review content, and it just was not scalable. So
Yeah.
start in terms of supporting those that obviously built these apps is to just come up with a playbook. I called it how to market your app. And it's really kind of best practices for listing an app in the app marketplace, but then also like what are different go to market motions that you can take advantage of that you don't need to engage Zoom with, right? Or the company with. Could be social media, could be a customer story, could be PR. There's a lot of different things that um, companies could do. So I think that was really important. After that, it's taking a bit more of a strategic look, partnering with product marketing, business development, to understand, how can you build scalable go-to-market programs. So, you know, um, one of those was launching Essential Apps, was the first, AI productivity bundle that worked with Zoom meetings to support small businesses who had a lot of administrative pain points between before, during, and after meetings. And that was a bundle of 10 plus apps. And so that was solving a very specific customer need that clearly was prioritized among other things. When looking at large customers, it was really more about, well, what apps will actually add value to the overall company solution, which is a collaboration, a communication platform that just works. So kind of coming up with that better together story was really important. And then finally, you've got verticals, right? You've got retail, financial services, healthcare, education. So, how do you make sure you're addressing those needs? And a lot of that came down to partnerships, even more so with those teams, the product and the product marketing teams there. So, all very much customer led, but also, what is scalable, because you can't do it all. So you
Yeah.
got to choose. So that's kind of how, from an app marketplace, apps were prioritized.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because I've been on both sides of this,
Mm-hmm.
situation where like I was the one pinging a giant, like a huge company and was just like, look, we built an app. We should totally do something
And,
together. But then I was
yeah,
on the
and
other
I
side
agree.
where people build apps with us and they wanted to promote them as well. And so it's interesting to see how you bridge that. And I think it always goes back to the customer, to your point, is like what do customers
Mm-hmm.
actually want to hear about, right? And then the
Mm-hmm.
second one is probably the metrics as well. Like probably the,
Yes.
the MRR, as you mentioned, like that's the North Star metric. And that's probably the thing that, you know, any founder who pinged somebody like yourself in that situation should have also had in mind, just like, how does this drive like MRR for,
Yeah, if they're
the
aware
partner?
of that being the goal, right? I think, and I guess it just depends on the effort and the initiative. But agree.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned a playbook. Was that like like a real playbook that was published online, which people could
Yeah,
like see
it's
and like
it's
understand?
public access. Yeah. So yeah, it's basically a playbook called How to Market Your App, and then I would do quarterly webinars, just because I think when you're dealing with certain audiences like developers, they very much want to be a part of the journey. Not that another customer doesn't, but I think developers in particular, they want to be a part of the journey. They want to know that they're being heard. And they also want things that work and that they could just start working with right away. That also is about marketing materials. And so, yeah, that is on the YouTube channel at Zoom. And it basically walks through, just reminding you of, like, just as a reference for those out there, of like, gee, how would we build a playbook? It's just kind of like, who's your company, who's your customer, what are the different products that you offer, what are the priority products, because not all products are equal. And then coming down, whether it's an app marketplace or partnerships, thinking about what are just turnkey solutions or go to market tactics that a partner or an app could actually just go and do, right? Social media, blog, reaching out to industry, affiliated, news sources, and so forth. So lots of different things, but again, it's just helping them understand ways they could go to market. And then you never know, right? Things can work out where you're like, wow, this is working really well. We're getting a lot of buzz or attraction or awareness, adoption, whatever it is. Maybe we should be doing more with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's interesting as well, because if you're approaching it from the mindset of the founder, like there's often like in partnerships what I call like the integration tango, where one side builds the integration, the other side promotes it. And I think that's oftentimes a mindset which dominates, these discussions when founders are reaching out, because they're like, we put all this work in, we build an app. It took like,
Mm-hmm.
3 months to build it. Are you promoting it now? And I think the reality oftentimes when working with big app marketplaces is that that's just not the case. Like you still need to promote it yourself as well. Like you will have to build it
Yeah,
and promote it, because the prize of being like, a preferred partner is so large that you have to show traction first. You have to show first that this is something your customers want, or,
yeah,
in this case, Zoom or Atlassian's customers want, before, one of these giant companies will invest further.
totally. And that's also why I kind of have a bit of a distinction between apps or go to market programs that are a bundle of apps, like very kind of thoughtful on terminology, just to make sure there's an understanding of how it might be different than a strategic partner,
Yeah. I
that
do like
we'll
the idea
potentially
of,
talk a little bit more about. Go ahead.
yeah, I do like that idea of bundling apps as well. It feels like it's a
Yeah.
nice middle ground where each individual app might not be like, like warranting its own dedicated campaign, but as a bundle, it's easier to promote all the apps together.
Yeah, and the solution was a bundle. So basically, if you were qualified for essential apps, when you would open your Zoom meeting, you would actually have access to it. And then you would have to go ahead and, download the different apps or add them to use it. And they were also kind of categorized into three different categories. So yeah.
Got it. Awesome. I know we're, getting progressing time-wise quite well. So if anybody in
Okay.
the audience has questions, I do want to open it up as well. So if you have anything, feel free to drop a comment as well, and Sharon and I will discuss your questions. But I wanted to flip the script now, because you also worked at Atlassian on some really big campaigns with giants like AWS, Adobe, and,
Mm-hmm.
and Dropbox. And
Yes.
one of the things that we encountered, I'm not going to name the name, but like at Hopin, we partner with a lot of these giants as well, and they would dangle a really large amount of traffic in front of us. They would be like, we have 15 million web views every month
Mm-hmm.
on
Mm-hmm.
XYZ blog or something like that. you know if you partner with us, these 15 million people will look at your content, which sounded phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously then as a startup, you're really excited about it. But the reality
Yeah.
is that they have like around, 1,000 other partners that are launching co-marketing activities in the same
Right.
time. And so that 12 million is actually split up into like tiny, tiny bits and fractions and verticals and segments and so forth. So how do you stand out when you like run campaigns with these giant companies?
Yeah, no, it's a totally fair question. I think it starts with, you're not looking to create a one-off campaign. You're really looking to develop a long-term relationship with identified strategic partners. And that takes a lot of effort. So there's a lot of factors that go into just saying these are the ones we want to play with and why. Um, After that, though, I do think there are some things that are important to consider to build that relationship. Like, there's a handful of things. Like the first thing I would think about would be the product roadmap, right? So understanding from your company and also your partner perspective, what are the quarterly as well as the annual roadmaps to also identify what are the biggest launches we actually care about? What are the themes that we're trying to solve for as a company? Like how do those layer up so you can have that understanding? The second thing is KPIs, which we talked a little bit about before, but just understanding, hey, what are their KPIs versus ours? They may be different. that actually was a big learning for me when I had joined at Atlassian. And this was earlier than where they are today, but it was at a time when, awareness and adoption might have been more important for them than leads in a particular relationship. But the partner was all about leads. And if you didn't know that, you then probably would not match the right campaigns to deliver on those results. So I think always having an open communication, sometimes over communicating is better, because it's very different than inside a company where hopefully you're also all on the same page, but it's just very different. You don't know what's going on at a partner um, as much. I think the third thing is when it comes to campaigns, I mean, ask them what works. They should know. Just like you should know, hey, what works? Is it a webinar? Is it social media? Whatever it is, like what is going to actually move the needle to get to that KPI? Uh, and if you don't know, test and learn together. And I think a lot of people sometimes are scared to even bring that up. At least that's what I found at times. But I do think that's probably goes from my Intuit days, which is a very much just, hey, let's test and learn and figure out what do we scale, what do we pivot. So that's just really important. And then last but not least, build the relationship, have open communication. That's where kind of the cool opportunities, I will say, happen, right? It could be a strategic contract you never thought you would have. It could be a brainstorming session. So those are some things to think about, to how do you rise to the top
Yeah.
of all the different efforts that a partner is doing.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack there, and I feel like there's also like years and years of like trial and error to get to that point that went
Mm-hmm.
into this answer. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like when you're discussing these co-marketing opportunities, there's always so much hope value at the beginning. Like it looks phenomenal. There's like
Yes.
50 million website views,
Yes.
etc. And so it's kind of it's very difficult to actually like land that initial proposal and get into that test and learn mindset, and like also help the
Mm-hmm.
team understand that this is not going to be the magical switch you're just going to turn on and all of a sudden like your business is going to explode. Most of the time it requires like quite a lot of iteration to get to that desired outcome.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely valid point. I think a lot of people are like, oh, we've got a contract in place, we've got XYZ. It's a relationship. It's like two different companies coming together, and you don't know how you don't know how you're going to work honestly at the end of the day with the partner, and they don't know how so you have to kind of see how that progresses.
Yeah.
Um, and just to echo what you said, I'm one of those people that say any question is a good question. So if you have a question, please ask.
Yeah, absolutely. um Yeah, I think that's spot on. I do want to like dive a little bit deeper because I feel like in top of like the campaigns itself and like understanding the right
Yeah.
KPIs and so forth, there's also like an element of enablement, right? Like oftentimes you're so deep
Hmm.
into the weeds yourself that you kind of like understand, this is what the tools do, this is how they work together, this is the value proposition and so forth. But like your sales team might not know it, or your partner sales team might
Yes.
not know it, or the customer
Yes.
might not get it, right? Like so often like you
Hmm.
launch a marketing campaign which is like especially like a meme or something like that, which is like very funny if you understand what it does. Like if you understand what the
Hmm.
solutions do. But if you don't understand what they do, then it's kind of pointless. Like people are lost, right? So
Yes.
so how do you enable like internal teams, external teams, and customers at scale when you look after like 2,000 apps?
Yeah, no, totally fair. I think a lot of it is not just always about the content, it's just ensuring adoption. So I think it's almost like being where your employees are. So where are the sales team, and also where's the product marketing team? Because you kind of want to embed your content within that. And similar to how I described scalable go-to-market programs and specific vertical efforts, you want to embed that into the different sales presentations. But if it's a significant launch internally, um, it's similar to like what a product marketer would do for a launch, like the pre, during, post. You want to make sure that you're embedded into whether it's North America, APAC, EMEA, from a global perspective, like into their field calls, being able to present, making sure that you have the right training materials, battle cards, customer testimonials, and slides that they can go ahead and customize, right? So you really want to be where your employees are. So that's kind of the internal motion, and also having those being customer facing assets as well. Then when it comes down to partners, there's always going to be typically a partner portal where companies can go to access different assets from the company to use. But again, if it's a major launch, I actually do like a partner enablement effort because I want them to amplify voice and I want it to be easy for them. So if I understand most of the tactics are going to be email and social media, then I'm going to focus on that, right? And so, just making sure everyone knows where they need to go for as a centralized resource, but making sure it's right for them is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess the challenge comes from the sheer volume, right? Like this was my
Hmm.
challenge as a partner leader in an org with like a substantial sales team, that I would go
Hmm.
in and explain to the sales team like this is what our partners do. Sales teams normally like very excited about talking about partners because it's like learning about another startup. We would bring in the founder and they would like learn about, like they would pitch the sales team about their tool, which they also really enjoyed. But then ultimately there was a lot of pushback from our leadership, because our leadership said like we have our own products to sell. We're not here to sell partner products. So how do you overcome like an objection like that, where your sales team has to juggle so many different tools? I mean, for example, Zoom
Hmm.
or Atlassian, like you have a whole suite of tools that you have to remember, plus
Right.
all the partners that you have as well.
Yeah, I think some things to think about, particularly like for larger customers when, putting that better together story, is there were some incentive programs. It was like an ongoing incentive program, but, if we already knew that we had a list of customers that were waiting for, say, a certain integration to happen that maybe wasn't native, that a third party app would honestly solve for that, and hence why you have partners, to have an incentive just to make sure there's that focus. But clearly, you're going to align with sales leadership about that, as well as other teammates, to make sure everyone's on the same page for a specific period of time. So that might be one example of how you get focus.
Yeah, got it. I do like that. And it also goes back to one of the key things that I always talk about and also mentioned in the book, is that like if you
Hmm.
don't have shared customers, you don't have a partnership. Like having that lined up is like probably pretty important as well. Like making sure that you have like
Hmm.
that list of like these are all the people who requested in the past. So there's an
Yes,
easy way to get like people to use it and also create success stories. Because those are like probably what the sales team remembers the most when they go on a
very
call and
much
say
so.
like I had a customer last week and they really liked it. So you
Yeah.
should try it as well.
Yeah, I think that customer stories are oftentimes overlooked, or maybe they feel like it's too much effort, but those are key for, yeah, understanding how to use something and also understanding how to tell the story even better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to, we talk a lot about customers. And so one of my final questions, I know we're hitting up on time,
That's
is
okay.
just trying to understand, how do you stay close to your customers when you have so many of them? Like at Hopin, we started as a startup with like, a couple thousand people who were working with the tool, and it was kind of easy to like still keep an eye on like who's using it, to like hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands or then millions or tens of millions. How do you make sure that you like still have like an ear in the market and like, understand what customers actually want?
Yeah, I think it still comes down, even though, it's like millions of customers, it still comes down to segmentation, understanding like who's your customer target, what's the primary versus secondary, what are their pain points, and how is this solution going to make it better? For example, we talked a little bit about Indiegogo before. So, Indiegogo had a lot of hardware startups that, the founders had raised the money, but they were, everyone has their expertise. However, they were stalling at product development and distribution. And so by looking at the data, observing, listening, recognizing, hey, maybe partnerships could help with that. That's how we ended up getting in bed with Aero Electronics or an Ingram Micro, where one focuses on product development, one focuses on distribution. Those are ways that those partners form. I think besides that, I think things to think about is talk to your sales team, talk to customer care, talk to your partners, right? And obviously customers. I mean, there's so many touch points that you can have to get those insights of what you need to do for the customer
Yeah.
and for the business. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of like having like a mix of like direct and indirect feedback. through partners
Mhm.
specifically, because I guess like if you think about it, like if you have like 1 million customers and 2,000 apps or whatever, then probably each partner is serving like a specific segment of customers. And so by talking to them, you will learn like what that category of customers is interested in versus just, random samples from your customer base as well.
Right. Right.
Awesome. So we are hitting up on time. I saw that Hillary already had to leave, but I do want to say thanks, Hillary, for joining us live. Before we go, if I'm a partnership leader and I want to learn more about partner marketing and product marketing, where can I go to find more resources about this apart from following Sharon on LinkedIn, which I think everybody should be doing anyways?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it just starts first with the why, like really understanding why would you want to learn more about product marketing versus partnership marketing. I think things you could do today or tomorrow would be if you're working at a company, chat with a colleague in that space, have a actual or a virtual coffee chat, and just learn. It's an informational chat. And those are sometimes the best actually to build relationships. Also, reach out to people on LinkedIn that have roles that maybe you're like, I wonder what that's about, right? I think most people are open to those, conversations, and I don't think people do that enough. Um, so yeah, I think that if you are obviously looking to transition into either of those roles, I'm happy to connect from a coaching perspective. But if you just are like, hey, I want to just chat about this particular opportunity and get your feedback, like please reach out. And then obviously, Franz, talk a little bit more about your book and
Yeah.
appropriate,
Yeah, I do think we cover partner marketing a little bit, but I always been joking that, I wrote the book on partnerships and now I'm gearing up for another book on partnerships. And I do think that
Great.
partner marketing deserves a much bigger spot because we have a chapter about co-marketing and how to
Yes.
be part of your partner's workflows rather than just like one-off promotions, which I think is also a really important distinction, and several
Yeah,
other things that are in the book as well. I'm not going to tease it too much.
that's okay. All good. I appreciate being on board for this discussion today.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, we're already over time. So let's wrap it up.
Okay.
Sharon, I really appreciate you taking the time today and sharing a little bit more about what it looks like behind the scenes of like giant companies like Atlassian and Zoom, just because I think empathy is really important. If you're a founder and
Hmm.
you're pinging like somebody and you're like, why are they not getting back to me? It's really important to
Yeah,
understand, like, what does it life look like on their side? If there are thousands of people who are
sure.
pinging them regularly, how are they prioritizing? I think those are really important, and that really helps us create better partnerships as a community as well. So yeah, thanks for taking the time today. And if you've been
Thank
watching the
you.
show live, really appreciate you taking the time as well. We'll be back with another show in 2 weeks' time. And until then, have a great day. See you.
Thank you.
Hark now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm, so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Scripts command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through wearable seats to boxes flow.